This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support, and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com. Now let's get into the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Better Every Shift podcast. My name is Aaron Zamzow. With me, as always, is Janelle Fasquette. Hello, Janelle. She is the co-captain, editor-in-chief of Fire Rescue One and the brains behind this whole thing, which you probably will know if you listen some more here. Hi, Janelle. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. I'm super fired up today because we have with us Chief Nick Martin. And I got to preface this. I've seen Chief in a 2-day seminar, and I was not bored. I was super fired up. He's a very informative chief. He's very passionate about furthering education. And welcome, Chief. By the way, how are you?
Thank you. I'm well. I'm glad to be on the show, and I got some of the email about some of the things guys might want to talk about. So I'm pretty excited about some of that, and looking forward to it.
Well, you could throw that email out because I basically go just based on what we're passionate about and what we're talking about. I'm kidding, of course, but we'll dive into it. But let me just introduce you a little bit better. You're the division chief with City of Salisbury Fire Department, North Carolina. You've served as the chief of training for the City of Columbia, South Carolina. You were also a lieutenant with DC Fire and EMS. You're the founder and president of Combat Ready Fire Training. Which is combatfireready.com. You also teach, what's that?
Other way around. Combat Ready Fire. Close. We'll take it.
See, now they'll remember at least, right?
Yep.
That's it. Yep. Combatreadyfire.com. And just a darn good guy. I've had a chance to talk to you a little bit behind the scenes, and when you came and presented our department, a lot of people speak really highly of seeing what you do, and watching your YouTube channel. I just the passion that you have, and obviously the knowledge is there too, but the passion comes out in your videos, and you could kind of see as you start them, you just get more and more passionate about it. Where did that passion for training really start?
I don't know. I've been doing this a long time. I started in 1994 in my hometown as a volunteer, and then pretty quickly, I have no idea really how, but I guess I was a volunteer officer a few years later, and I started getting roped into being the guy that led drill nights. You know what I mean? And so I was doing that, and then later on again, I was just, now, a company officer, and, actually, I was on a new company that had just opened up as a heavy rescue company. And I was, pretty good at some of the rope rescue stuff and some of the newer stuff that people are getting into. So then I got asked hey, would you do more of that stuff? And so I started doing, I started actually kind of traveling around doing a little bit of heavy rescue stuff. And then I don't know, it's just one of those, it's one of those things you turn around and you're so you've been doing this for 20 years. How'd you get started? And you're I have no idea. It just happened. It's kind of how I just fell into it, I guess.
It's kind of your passion. We're all about being better every shift, but right, every time you probably came across something, you're oh, I need to learn more about that. Right. So you dig in, learn, and then teach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my stuff, I have always, sworn that I never wanted to be fake. I never wanted to be one of these guys that just talked about things they don't know about, or just talked about generic things, so I've always made it my point, and I've had the fortune to have the opportunity to talk about things that I've experienced, or talk about things that I'm passionate about, and just kind of as my career has evolved, I focus on what I do in my job, what I have fresh experience with. And, like I said, a while ago, I used to teach this heavy rescue stuff. We run, I'm in charge of our special operations stuff now and everything, but I'm not the same level that I was back then. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to jump on here and tell you how to rig a system or do a trench rescue. I can do that, but that's not my expertise. You know what I mean? And so I try to stick with what I am most passionate and most informed about. And like I said, a lot of that has come by just kind of talking about incidents that I've experienced, whether they're good or bad, and things that we've done in the departments I've been with that I feel like are good or bad. And one of the things I figured out a long time ago after starting into teaching is I have never, I don't think, I'm trying to make sure I'm accurate, but I have never like been a state instructor. I think like technically, like I probably have my name on a ledger somewhere, but I've never taught any courses like that. And I never really wanted to, because what I've enjoyed about what I do is I have the absolute freedom to talk about whatever I want, to say it how I want to say it, and to have a different opinion about it the next day and talk differently about it the next day if my experience or opinion on it evolves. And I have always liked that freedom.
And and that's kind of evolved into combat ready fire training then, right? Like, um, and I remember one of the things that you talked about with us is, yeah, there's the book way to do it, but then there's experiences and things that we see, and we got to learn from that and then like put that on and teach that, right? And is that kind of where combat ready fire training came from?
Yeah, well, I mean, so years ago when I started this sounds like makes it sound archaic saying things like that, but like back in the day, so to speak, it was there was a huge lag between the generation of new skills or information and from when it made it into the books, and so you still have that today. But I feel like social media and just videos and the pace of society or whatever has lessened that. But like back in the day, it really was like guys would be doing a skill or a technique or a new way of doing things on the streets for years before it would ever start getting into a textbook and being formally taught. And so I think a lot of training companies kind of started with that, with like that, and with that goal or that mentality of the beyond the book, street smart kind of thing. And that's definitely what I started with. I've been kind of teaching on the road now, I guess for almost the past about not past 19 years. I was doing it, with a different group for a long time. And then just the stars aligned one day for me to kind of continue what I was doing, but do it kind of more, start my own thing in my own group and kind of continue it with my vision the way I wanted to. And that's kind of where we are today.
That's great. And you talked about that delay, the gap between, when the new techniques or training elements come out and when it makes it to the book. Well, in that absence, people are going to fill it in, right? And now we've just got everyone online, has their own accounts. Like, how can the average firefighter know who's legit when there's just a sea of content and just, anyone can start their own YouTube channel these days?
That I was 100% thinking about that before I even knew you were going to ask that, because again, back in the day, you had your three magazines. You had Firehouse, Fire Engineering, Fire Rescue, and then you had whatever textbooks. And for lack of a better term, they were all basically the Bible. You know what I mean? Is like in most firefighters' minds, if it got printed in one of those sources, it must be right. You know what I mean? And so that's where everybody pretty much got their information. And so nowadays, you're right. In 20 seconds, anybody can start, some kind of social media channel and be putting out information. And so now that lessens the barrier of getting different views or fresh information out of there, but it really puts the responsibility more on the learner to sift through the nonsense and decide what is good and what is not. And that's a scary thing, because, a lot of younger guys that don't know that they know how to tell what is better or what is good or what is not. And so you really kind of, one of my friends, he wrote an article at one point, I'm pretty sure it was a published article, and it was titled, check the resume. And I remember that, the first time, anytime that I'm going to go take a class or I'm going to read something, even before I really, and this might be wrong, but even before I hear what the person wants to say, I want to know what's your resume and what's your background with this. And, I say this as somebody that has a pretty heavy social media preference or presence. I would encourage everybody to check the resume. Check the resume on me. You know what I mean? You've got to look at the source, and you've got to look at what is their experience with that prior to just like digesting that and doing it on a fire tomorrow. And also, you've got to realize that every fire department is different. That's one of the things I've gotten over 20 years of traveling around North America is a wide understanding of exactly how different fire departments can be. And I'm just telling you, not that I know it all, but I'm telling you, if you haven't been outside of your bubble, if you haven't been to like different places and talked to different people, you have no idea how different it can get. And that means there are things to learn, both good and bad, from that. But you've got to when you're digesting information from a source, you've got to compare the environment that person works in or operates in to yours, and just kind of figure out if that meshes or not.
Mhm.
Yeah, and this brings up a really good question. We were talking kind of before the podcast. You know, you have East Coast, West Coast, even different communities have different ways of speaking and on the fire ground, and different tactics and techniques. And you have a couple of training programs they're aggressive, right? And now, of course, some people you say aggressive, and they go, yeah, we need to be aggressive, and others are saying, whoa, let's hold on with that word. And to this goes back to your point. You have to look at who's saying it, what's the situation, but what is your definition of aggressive, and how are you using that?
Well, I mean, I have seen aggressive, the word, live two different lives. In some conversations or in some time periods, aggressive was the standard. It's what everybody needed to be. It's what the expectation was. And in other conversations, aggressive got equated to reckless, and it's what we needed to avoid. And what it has always been to me is aggressive is with intent. It's acting with intent to resolve a situation, as quickly as possible. And you got to look at what we do, fighting fires and go into rescue calls or whatever. And you got to think, well, if my loved one was involved in that situation, what would I want? And I would want somebody who knows what they're doing to fix it as quickly as possible. And that to me is aggressive.
Yeah.
I want somebody that is moving, forward in all aspects to as quickly as possible resolve the problem that my loved one is having.
What does it mean to be combat ready?
Well, I mean, so that was a phrase there's a long story behind that. And I'll give you the short version, or we can go deeper into it if you want.
Yeah.
But when I was a live-in firefighter at this place called Kentland in Prince George's County, Maryland, which is right outside of DC. And what that means is they gave me a place to live for free in exchange for running fires, which, when I was young, in my 20s, was exactly what I wanted to do. And it's basically kind of a dormitory kind of situation. So anyway, there was a guy there that was my age, and his name was Matt, and his father's name was Pete. And I later would find out that his father's name was Lieutenant Pete Lund, and he was at the time a lieutenant on Rescue Company 2 in Brooklyn. And he was a 30-year plus experience, storied kind of guy. And I had the opportunity to meet Pete and go to calls and fires with Pete, for a couple of years, because he decided to come join the firehouse so that he could go to fires with his son, which was a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, Pete's thing, I grew up in Philly, and so like I was vaguely aware of the New York City Fire Department, but I was never a super buff. But what I knew, or what I would find out, is that you always imagine these rescue companies were the busiest firefighting companies in the city. They were hand-picked veterans. There's a lot of trust and prestige that went into getting that assignment. And here was this guy who was a lieutenant of one of these companies, had been in those positions for years. He had been on the rescue for 20 plus years, I think at that time. He was a lieutenant in the Bronx in the 80s. Like literally, if the guys remember hearing about like the Bronx is burning, well, I mean, he was a lieutenant on the rescue company there while that was happening. So he had all this super experience and everything. And I just remember, a couple of different experiences with him. And, one of them was, I remember one night, I was riding in charge of the tower ladder because I was a lieutenant at the time. And, I had this guy in the back who had been on the job longer than I had been alive. And here I am, I'm riding up front, you know what I mean? And so I'm just having young guy thoughts in my head. And I'm like, well, this guy in the back, he's a badass. I need to make sure he knows that I'm a badass also. So I'm like, how should I do that? And I'm like, okay, we go out the door in the evening time for smoke in an apartment building. And I've got a pretty strong sixth sense. This is a food on the stove call. So I'm like, well, I know what to do. I'll let him know I'm a badass by getting off the rig half dressed, because I'm too busy. I go to enough fires to be troubled with this. And so I get off the rig and like my waist straps are swinging because I saw a picture of a guy one time whose waist straps were unbuckled and he looked cool. So I'm like, well, I want to look cool. So, I get off like that. My coat's not buttoned all the way up. My gloves in my pocket. I get off and I turn around and I look at this guy who's got 30 years on the New York City Fire Department, and he looks like it's his first day out of rookie school. I mean, he's got his chin straps hanging and his hood is up, his gloves are on his hand, he's got tools tucked under his arm. He's buttoned up like he's about to go into the most hellacious inferno you can imagine. And I'm like, okay, copy that. Here I am with my, waist strap swinging and everything. And I just had a few experiences with him. And like, I remember one day, just there was kind of like a little bit of friendly banter. And they're like, hey man, what's the deal? They don't have food on the stove calls in Brooklyn. And, he kind of got into this thing about like, no, haha, whatever, but basically sharing that his expectation for his company was that if you wanted to work in that firehouse, your expectation was that you were to be combat ready every day. You were to, the citizens of that fire department, of that city, expected the best service from every company at all times. And when his company showed up, they were going to be ready for the worst at all times. And that was his expectation. And if you didn't want to meet it, you can go work somewhere else. But, and it just kind of clicked with me. And I was like, this guy, like I said, is old. He's been fighting fire longer than I've been breathing. He is, I have him over here on my bookshelf, all the Bronx is burning text, picture books and stuff like that. Cause we used to look at pictures in books instead of on the internet. And
what's a book? What
I know
is
I
that?
can write,
Right?
for those that are confused, I can get one and we can
Yeah.
show it. But I'm like, this guy has lived the life that like is what I want to do. And here I am living in a firehouse, that's how much I want to do this. And I'm half-assing it because I think it looks cool. And here is this guy who's done more than I'll ever be able to do. And he's twice my age, been fighting fire longer than I've been alive. If he can get off the rig and do it the right way every single time, what excuse do I have not to? And that is just something that's always stuck with me. And then unfortunately, Pete retired from New York City in 2003, if my memory serves me correctly, and basically was unfortunately was killed in the line of duty 2 years later fighting fire with his son at a house fire in the town where he grew up and had lived all of his life. And so a lot of it is just kind of I guess whatever I can do to kind of pay tribute to Pete and his memory and what he did for me and what I'm sure he did for thousands of other firefighters in the time that he was able to teach and share with them.
Yeah. Well, what a great story. And I'm actually gonna, I'm gonna confirm this because I remember from your seminar, you showed a picture of an alarm call, and your crews are putting the stick up, and you're talking about rig placement, right? And you said this is an alarm. It's probably the second one we had at this the other day, of second at this particular address, and you said I want my companies going to it, like not pretending this is a fire, right? Until we get in there and investigate. So think about rig placement. Think about, can you reach that corner? Is this the best place? Are you ready? Dressed for that particular event. And so, what other ways do you get your crews to get that combat ready? kind of thought process? I mean, you had a very humbling experience with
Yeah.
it that lasted, 30 years with you almost. I mean, that's awesome. How do we, and how can our listeners make that same impact?
Yeah, well, I jumped on the trampoline a lot. You know what I mean? I jumped up and down on the trampoline a lot. And a lot of times I had fun and I went really high, and a bunch of times I fell off. And I am trying to do what I can do to prevent other people from falling off the trampoline, because most of the time I just got a bruise, but you mess this up, you mess this job up, you can a lot of times you can get a lot worse than that. You know what I'm saying? And I
Mhm.
was lucky. Like I did the same stupid stuff everybody else did, and I was just lucky. And there are some people that are going to do that same stupid stuff, and they're not going to be lucky. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so I mean, there's a lot of ways that we impart that. Is number one, it is just very clear from day one in rookie school, in my department, how we operate and what the expectation is. And there's a lot of things we tell them, but one of the things that we tell them is if you're looking to put your gear next to the fire truck, sit in a recliner, and watch DirecTV for the next 24 hours, you have chosen the wrong fire department. And I can give you the directions on how to get to some other ones, but this ain't the right place. We want our people to have fun. We want our people to be relaxed. I'm an old school guy. I believe in all the old school kitchen table and having fun on your 24 hours, and not everything has to be business all the time. And you do you when you're in the firehouse, right? But the deal is that when the bell rings, it's game time, and it's time to be very serious. And there is no compromise on that. And the guys know that, if they want that comfort of being able to have, they want to be able to be comfortable in the firehouse, and be able to cut some corners that maybe other fire departments don't allow. Then the deal is that when the bell rings, you better play like it's the Super Bowl. And if you don't, then that's going to be a serious conversation. And it's just very much the culture. It's very much the expectation. We have a lot of formal expectations about what we do on structure fires, even what we do on automatic fire alarms. I mean, one thing you mentioned, we have an expectation that on we send 2 engines and a ladder, and a battalion to the automatic fire alarms. And there is an expectation that, when that they will basically set the aerial and, position the ladder truck properly, drop the outriggers, and get the aerial to the proper position, or the roof. And they'll do it every time. They've done it twice today. Before I got on the podcast, I heard them give another one, because when they get up there, they'll give the battalion chief a roof report on the operations channel. And I heard it this morning. We had a fire alarm, actually, at my son's preschool, right before lunchtime. And, they did it there. I mean, because of course I went to that call.
Yeah.
But, and the guys like it. You know what I mean? I think the guys like it, because one thing I've learned about culture is you attract what you advertise. And if you advertise that you were the fire department where you can sit in a recliner and get paid, that's exactly who's going to come work for you. You know what I mean? And if you advertise that you're the department that runs to the fire truck when the box tone drops, and knows where they're going and knows what to do, and is stretching lines and throwing ladders and all that kind of stuff, then that's who you're going to attract. And that's who we're looking for.
Yeah, and that's that training culture then too, because then that transfers to everything, right? Not only from the call, but the way that you guys train. Give me a little more insight as to. So I'm a newer training officer. What advice would you have for me to help kind of uh, push that culture? If we're not
Well,
there now, how do I get my department to move that way?
number one is there's two kinds of, there's definitely there's a chicken and egg conversation about operations and training, right? So what do we do? Do we operate the way that we train, or do we train the way that we operate? You know what I mean? And you could have that conversation for hours. But I have learned that, and you got to kind of look at, depending on the size of your organization, where do you report? Because there are a lot of times, there are training officers, that might report to, like, the admin side of administration, like an assistant chief of administration or something like that. And there are training officers that might report to the operations chief. And, I have always thought that operations and training need to be, in lockstep together, because there is, whichever way that chicken and egg conversation comes out, I mean, those two are very closely related.
Hmm.
But you also see that there are really two different kinds of training, at least two different kinds of training bureaus you see in departments. Some of them are puppy mills. Like, what they do is they run recruit schools and promotional academies, and they teach state level classes over and over and over again. And that's what they do, right? And there are other training bureaus that are more involved in more moving the organization forward. And they're involved in things like after action reviews, and they're involved in things like developing or delivering their own internal academies, whether that's ladder company operations or captain academies or battalion chief academies or whatever, but things that are focused on how that department operates and what they are doing. And I think the types of organizations that I've been involved in, or what I've steered them towards, has always been that second one. Has always been involved that, like, my job here is not to just regurgitate a state level class over and over again. I can send you somewhere for that. Our job here is to basically do two things: go to fires and get ready to go to fires. And when I'm not doing one, I'm doing the other. You know what I mean? But that's pretty much what our job is at all times. And what you're looking at in terms of preparing to go to fires is all kinds of things. Depending on how your organization is structured, there's a lot to be said for getting involved in buying equipment, specifying apparatus, working on policies, going to fires. You know what I mean? That is something I've always, people would hear training officer and they're like, oh, he doesn't go to real fires. One of the benefits of that situation is I went to all the fires, not just the fires that happened for my company on my shift, but all of them, because we had a strong belief that you're only as good as your last fire, and who's going to listen to me as the training captain or training chief if I've been on a desk job for 5 years not going to fires? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? You've got to
Right.
stay in touch with that stuff. So I think that conversation about how to build a good training bureau or how to be a good training officer is really dependent on what size organization you're in, and how that organization is structured. But it's got to always be about the main thing, and the main thing is going to fires.
Yeah, and we've been talking culture, high level, kind of macro level. If we take it down to a more micro level and you're just talking about one individual, let's say you have somebody on the crew and you see potential in them, but they're just like not quite buying in to the combat ready mindset, or whatever culture you're establishing of training at the department. Do you have any advice or tips for a company officer that's just trying to get somebody on board to kind of get it? Like, they see the potential, they're not someone you're looking to toss out, but someone who just needs that extra push.
Well, I mean, I read a great book, several years ago that I think has so much application of fire service. It was a military book, and it talked about, basically when you look at a person, that there's this square of four boxes that you can form, and basically by are they willing or unwilling, and are they able or unable, and there's four different possibilities that you get out of those two axes, and depending on where they fall, it kind of tells you what to do. Right? If I have somebody that is willing to do it, and they're able to do it, they're doing the job, what I need to do is just continue to support and push that person in the right direction, because they're the all-star. They're what we want to see here. I want to promote that. I want everybody else to see that, and I want to make that person even better. Right? And then, in the next situation, if I have that person that they're able to do it, but they're just not willing, or they're just not doing it quite yet, well, then I've got to look at that as kind of a little bit more of a coach, or a little bit more of a teaching kind of thing. And I think that's the box where people struggle a little bit, because I think the first thing you've got to make sure there is that, are you personally, whoever you are, whatever your position is, are you embodying and displaying the exact performance that you want to see? Because if you can't expect this person that works for you, or this person that you're trying to lead, to do anything any better than you do. So if you're not doing it exactly the way you want them to do it, then the problem isn't with them, it's with you. You need to get yourself in order, and you need to be the example that you want to see, And so now the next thing is that after that, I mean, if you're leading by example, then that I think you've got to say, like, does this person really understand what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, right? Because this is no longer the days of the man with the bugle said to do this, so I do that. We're not just in this is not the compliance generation. These are the generations of people who want to know why. And if they know why and it makes sense to them, they will probably buy into it and they will do it, and they will probably do it better than just following orders because they'll understand the intent behind it. They'll understand what we're really trying to achieve. So sometimes you've got to really break that down because you think that people understand the why, and they don't. And if you're just having surface level conversations, you'll never figure that out. But you've really got to kind of explore that, and there's lots of ways I guess you can talk to people or deal with people, but by asking questions or using examples or whatever, you've got to explore in this person's head, like, do they really get what we're trying to do here and why it matters? Because if they just think it's some BS that doesn't matter, they're not going to buy into it, and therefore they're not going to perform at much higher than the minimum possible standard. And so there's a lot of that coaching and stuff that needs to go on there. But one thing, honestly, that I hate to be this guy, but somewhere along the line, 20, 30 years ago, it became a lot more popular to be warm and fuzzy, and what that led to is nobody wanted to apply any rules anymore, and we have lost that. There does have to come a point that if I've told you what we need to do, and I've explained it every single way about why we need to do it, and I have given you the necessary training and equipment to do what I want you to do successfully, and you choose still not to do it, this is now a compliance issue. And that is a discipline issue. And you need to apply the discipline. And it needs to be that classic hot stove thing, that it burns everybody right away an equal amount. And you don't want to get there. You don't want to get there. But I have been in fire departments that, without exaggeration, have demoted people for wearing the wrong T-shirt, right? But would never say a thing to you if you screwed up a fire ground and burned a building down. And like, what are you telling people there? Like, the T-shirt is more important than the building? Like, so if operational performance is what is important to you, then it has got to be displayed that operational performance is what is being inspected here and is where the highest standard will be held.
Yeah, it goes back to setting those expectations too, right? Like you were talking about. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into you personally, though. Like, do you have times where do you go through some ruts where you're just like, I'm just not motivated, or
Oh, 1,000%, at least one day a week. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
So I
More,
mean,
maybe more.
it
But
depends, right?
what I have decided is, and I don't, I'm not going to try. I would try to say that I'm not egotistical, but I absolutely have an ego, and I think every firefighter does. And so you just got to embrace that. But what I've decided is my minimum standard is going to be better than some people's best standard. On my day that I don't want to be at the firehouse, that I don't want to do anything, I am still going to make sure that all of my equipment is in order, that I've got everything laid out properly, that my cylinder has, 4,998 pounds of air in it, even though it's supposed to only hold 4,500. And I'm still going to make sure that when the bell rings, that I get out the door quickly and I do my job.
Yeah.
And so because that is the tough I can't slack on. Like, if I don't get to the bottom of my email inbox today, or I don't do a great job emptying the trash, well, I guess I was a slug that day. And everybody has a slug day, right? But nobody's going to die if you didn't do a great job mopping the floor. But if you don't have your apparatus in order, if you don't have your personal equipment in order, and if you're not getting out the door quickly and doing your job when the call comes in, Well, now you're putting somebody else at risk, and that's just not okay for anybody to do in any day. If you can't show up and do that minimum standard, then just don't come to the firehouse today.
Yeah. And for some of us listening, and I'm glad you said, yeah, probably once a week you have that, but it's because of those principles. And does that then, do you feel that transfers, once you keep doing that, that just transfers, kind of gets you out of that rut?
Yeah, I mean, there's an old wives' tale about, like, if you want to go to a fire today, talk about it. We would have this competition almost. Like, I remember at one of my firehouses in D.C. where he'd be like, yeah, hope we go to a fire today. And like, yeah, what do you think we're gonna do? I'm like, well, I'd probably be a fire in a 3-story row. And they're like, yeah, that's okay. So what do you think? Like a basement fire? Yeah, let's do a basement fire, 3-story row. Okay, copy that. What do you want to do? You want to be first due, or you want to be third due? Because we have different positions that we would take. Like, let's go second due truck. I'm trying to make the alley and force that basement door. And like, you talk up this specific scenario, and sometimes you'd be like, man, that's eerie, because you'd run a very similar call later that night, or like, I always found, like, if I got in the mood of like cleaning my tools and like you ran a good drill, it's like you had worked up good karma, and you were rewarded with a fire, or with something like that. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think it definitely, like, it all depends on like why you're not in the groove that day. I mean, obviously some people can have some pretty serious personal stuff going on, whatever. But sometimes maybe you just, like, everything's fine. You just need a little motivation. And I've always found there, like once you get into the job, you get into the job. Like, if you can just get over the hump and like get in there and like, start cleaning up your Halligan bar, or start doing a good drill, or having a good conversation, like, it just snowballs from there.
Yeah. After and action reviews too can sometimes spur that, at least, hey, if you have this, you have to be ready for this. And you can't say this isn't going to happen because look at it just did over here.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and you had mentioned that earlier. It's almost like you play, I'm going to date myself here. Remember the game Mad Libs?
Oh yeah.
You fill in the blanks about, we're going to have a two blank story,
Yeah.
structure fire. It's like, I think we just created a new product, Chief. Like, it's called Fire Libs or something, where you can create your own fire
Yeah.
situations, as a rainy day drill. I love it. And actually took some good notes on that. I'm going to try that with my crew just on the next rainy day. So those listening, if you ever have a good one, send it to us and we'll get it to Chief. And
There you go.
maybe it might make it one of his presentations, or one of his courses on combat ready fire would be Mad Lib fire scenarios or something,
Yeah, I
as we go
like it.
forward. So, you had mentioned your passion for training. You've been in training. We talked about culture. Let me ask a little bit about, what do you see right now in the fire service? And for those listening, we try to talk about pertinent issues. What do you see as one of the most kind of glaring things in the fire service that we need to improve on?
Well, I mean, right now, I think there's a lot of, and the social media has contributed to it, and I'm sure I can be guilty of it at times, just like anybody. But I think right now there's a lot of, I guess, bashing is the right term. Is there's a lot of just like, idea against idea, fist fighting or whatever on the internet. And like, if you don't do this thing my way, you're a moron, and people are going to die. And I think, like, a lot of times the conversation over the years was supposed to be like learning from each other and pass it on, and like, improving things or whatever, and just kind of, this idea of looking more holistically, or looking more of a 360 around the fire service, and saying like, well, what can I get from how you operate, and what can you get from how I operate, and that it's not, just my way or the highway kind of thing. And I think a lot of one of those things is like the number of misconceptions that there are about certain tactics is it's amazing, and it's scary that people don't understand them, because unfortunately today's attention span, you know you're not getting somebody to read an 8-page article on this or that tactic, unfortunately, unless they're really ate up with stuff. Like, you're lucky if you can get them to watch a 30-second reel, or read I mean, and they're probably not going to read the caption, you know what I mean? And so now all of a sudden, you're having as much of a conversation as you can have in Instagram's 90-second reel limit. and somebody's watching that and they think that's all there is to it. And they
Mhm.
think that's all you've got to say about it, or they think there's not anything else to be considered. And there's so many things that are lost in there. I've been involved in a couple of different kinds of discussions about this tactic or that tactic, and what I've discovered is I've tried to look into different sides of it. Is like, wait a minute, when I say this guy that's fighting me on it doesn't understand at all that what I mean is that, or that this is a part of it, or I don't understand at all that when they're talking about how they do something, like this is the staffing level they're dealing with, or this is the type of area that they run, and that's different from what I'm doing, and so therefore the tactics are not equally applicable. And I think what maybe that's a long way of saying is that there's not as much of an environment as there needs to be about like further probing that or asking questions, like in order to deepen your understanding of somebody's perspective or what they offer or how they operate. What there is there's a lot of, man, I watched this 20-second guy, this thing, and he didn't talk about this, he didn't talk about that, they don't do this way, so he's a moron, let me mark him as my moron category. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
we're,
yeah.
we're missing stuff, because I talked about this, on another podcast recently. Is guys ask me all the time how I put up with what I put up with on social media, because the bottom line is when you put yourself out there, you're gonna get a lot of nonsense, and I get a lot of nonsense, and it doesn't bother me in the slightest for whatever reason. But the other thing I know is I know a lot of these genius old school rock star firefighters out there in different departments in the country that would never put themselves in the middle of this fray that they see on the internet. They're like, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, "You ought to, hey, you got this great experience. You ought to get in there and share this with these guys." Are you kidding me? Have you seen the idiots out there on the internet? I don't have the time in my life for that. I'm not getting involved in that. And so now what you're missing is guys out there are missing the perspective or lessons or conversation with so many people they will never hear of, just because those people don't want to get dragged into the trenches. And that is a loss for the fire service. There are so many good people out there that could and should be in the conversation, and they're not going to get into it because from the outside it looks like a bar fight. And
Yeah.
and you know what I mean? Like, who wants to get into that?
What's the best way to get them more involved? What's the best way to get that knowledge and experience out of them?
Well, I mean, if you know them, I mean, then the best thing to do is engage with them personally. If they're in your firehouse, or you can call them, or you have a mechanism to connect with them personally, then you should do that. But in terms of getting them to get involved in more of the national conversation or whatever, I don't know. Until we can get control of ourselves, I don't know how you can do it. It's some of the people that I see on the internet, the concept that somewhere they're allowed to be a firefighter and enter somebody's house with trust on their worst day of their life, it doesn't connect for me. I'm like, who is putting this person in an environment where they're to be trusted with lives and money on the table? Because to me, they seem like an absolute scoundrel based on how they present themselves. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah,
so we've
on
got
TikTok
to
or
get a handle
whatever.
on that. But I think that's a greater society issue than it is
Yeah.
just fire service.
Well, that's what the podcast is all about. We're vetting them, right? Like that's really what Janelle and I talked about is we want to try to have those people like yourselves on that. Hey, this is somebody you need to follow. This is somebody who has been there, has done that. Um, Janelle, of course, is going to tell you to, if you know so much, why don't you submit an article and write for Fire Rescue One or even work for you, right, Chief? Like you take on good instructors and are always willing to have that conversation. But very well said. And we come to a point where we like to kind of break it down a little bit, get more personal with you. We put you on what's called the hot seat. We now have a couple of listeners. Janelle's mom and my mom are probably our two predominant ones, and they like to ask questions that we then put you on the hot seat and ask. It's a little bit more, fast paced, fun stuff. And so, Janelle, I'm going to let you start today. What's your first hot seat question for Chief?
All right, Chief, I want to know what your all time favorite drill is, a personal favorite.
Okay. So, one of the things, one of the things I've always been, into was the masking up quickly thing. Is something my the lieutenant in charge of my training academy in DC, it was his thing. He made us do it. You had to come off the rig with everything, like your gloves on, everything on except your mask. Come off ready to go, and then mask up at the door in less than 10 seconds. And it was a real competitive thing. It's just something I've always done, and I see a ton of practicality in it because it's something you have to do on every fire also. So, that's always been one of my tops.
Best
Great.
time. What's the best time?
In my best times, under 10 seconds. These days, probably about 14 seconds, 14 to 15.
Still really good.
Well, I do what I can.
So I want to know, what are you reading, or who are you reading right now, that inspires you to continually get better?
Not enough. I need to do. I get bogged down in so much stuff between, what I do on the side here with this and my job and everything that I need to do more of that. I read as much social media probably as anybody else. There's a few different people on there that I like to follow in terms of different levels of things. Or different. Whether it's kind of skill level, or whether it's like command tactics level kind of stuff, or what their area of expertise is. There's kind of the books that I've been reading and stuff like that. There's I've read like kind of a lot of different military leadership books, and probably some of the ones are very common. Like I am a fan of like the Jocko stuff and a lot of the books that they put out and stuff. But there's also some more, I guess, obscure ones or whatever that were kind of more intended for smaller units and things like that. So been reading some of those.
What's the best place? Do you just find, hey, someone usually suggests something to you, whether it be social media, or where do you find the best place to go to get like ideas on what to read?
I don't like the one book that's one of my favorites. I have no idea. It's tremendously obscure book apparently, and I'm like wondering why it's not in every officer academy in the universe. But I can't remember for the life of me how I found it because I've just been using it for years. And I can't remember where I first heard of it. But a lot of stuff is word of mouth. You know what I mean? And I look at how people present themselves. Are they one of these guys that stands on the table and just yells about things? Or are they, they have like a gentlemanly kind of perspective and they're just putting out there, what they believe in, or what they do or whatever. So I kind of look at that, and then, I check the resume, what are they talking about, and what is their background with what they talk about? Are they a credible source with that? And, then I kind of, I give it a little test try, and I look at some of their stuff, and if it becomes good, then I keep on doing it. I've had a couple people that I've been like, I don't ever need to see anything this guy says again. And
Hmm.
fortunately, there are features that allow you to do that.
What's the book that you would recommend?
Small Unit Leadership by
Small unit
Colonel,
leadership.
and you got to look it up by like who it was. It was written by Colonel Dandridge Malone, and like you gotta like it's like in the obscure archives on Amazon, but it's like a $10 book, and it was like meant for like a 19-year-old Army sergeant in Vietnam, and like it's some of the most street smart, practical, company level. Like if you like, it's exactly what it says. If you're leading a small group of people, if you're a company officer or a battalion chief or whatever, like man, it is like full of stuff. I really think so anyway.
Awesome. Awesome.
All right, shifting things up a little bit. You're on a long drive. What are you listening to in the car? Are you rocking out to some music? You listen to books on tape? Where do you typically go with that?
I have a whole list of like different things just depending on like what my mood is. Like sometimes, yeah, you just got to like chill out and listen to some music. A lot of times also like I have like different podcasts I listen to, whether they're just like, entertainment kind of stuff, or whether they're, some of the podcasts on different leadership stuff or different fire service stuff. I'm also the guy that gets bored in the car and calls people. And then so like I end up calling like somebody I've been talking to, and like, just basically talking to them for an hour or two or whatever, and it, usually it's a fire department person. So just kind of talking about that kind of stuff.
That's great.
He's a lefty. I'm telling you, man. There, we same thing. I'll use that time to call,
Yep.
and you know, and maybe start with something, but then my attention will switch. So, one last question for you on the hot seat: Who inspires you the most?
Jeez, I don't know. It's tough because people are such an evolving thing, and I think what inspires me the most is honestly, the calls that we go on, and the experiences that we have. And again, I just, my everything I do is about some pretty serious calls that I've been on where things have gone either very well or gone very poorly. And I think that's what inspires me to be passionate about things. It inspires me with what I'm passionate about. It inspires me with, being, when we talk about like being at the firehouse on that day you don't really want to be there, at least doing those minimum things that are going to make me successful. If today we have a bad fire, I mean, I really, I think really that's it for me, is it's the calls.
Right, and that mindset that was ingrained in you by a mentor,
Yeah.
30 years ago almost, right? And it I think that's one of the most impactful things I've heard, in a long time is if you are a new firefighter or if you're a new company officer or even an older one, you can make that drastic impact on the next generation by one simple thing that you vividly remember and how many other people you have now impacted because of that combat ready mentality. So with that, Chief, we thank you so much for being here. What's the best place to get in touch with you at?
Either the website or social media. I've got a pretty, I'm on all the social media things. You can find me on there pretty easy. You can send me a message on there, but like honestly, a lot of times I don't get them, or I don't. I get a fair number of them, and sometimes I don't get to them all. So if you really want to get in touch with me, the best way to go is to go to the website, and send me an email, because I usually will get through those.
Okay.
But that's probably the best way.
combatreadyfire.com. That's
Yes.
combatreadyfire.com. That's where you can get in touch with Chief. Again, thank you so much for the insight, for the passion. Look forward to seeing you again in person. And thanks again, Chief, for being here. Uh, with that, everybody, you can also watch this on the Fire Rescue One YouTube page. Please rate and review the show. Um, and again, watching this, you might find and see some interesting things. But go to our YouTube page. You can also email us at bettereveryshift@firerescue1.com. But most importantly, everybody, learn something, do something, share something to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks.